Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service through a unique partnership with Alaska Public Media. It is Friday, November 18th, 2022. And if you'd like additional weather information on top of what I provide in this broadcast, you can go to weather.gov. That is the National Weather Service's online presence. It'll bring you to a map of the continental U.S. with Alaska and Hawaii to the lower left, and put your mouse, point and click anywhere on that map, and it'll pull up forecast and any relevant watches, warnings, or advisories for anywhere in the country. Of note, on this Friday afternoon, we have winter storm warnings for heavy lake effect snows downwind of Lake Michigan and portions of lower Michigan. There is a winter storm warning and heavy lake effect snow warnings in effect for areas downwind of Lake Erie as well as Lake Ontario, including the Buffalo, New York area, which could see as much as 3 to 4 feet of snow from this particular lake effect snow event through this upcoming weekend, as some colder air crosses the relatively warmer waters of the lake, is able to take that moisture and produce some heavy early season snowfall. Other note, way out to the west, the gray areas across the Pacific Northwest, including areas of Washington, Idaho, Oregon that are in gray, those are air stagnation advisories. The air is not mixing, so it leads to very poor air quality. And one of the reasons being this large air ridge of high pressure that extends from the lower 48 Pacific Northwest across western Canada up into the panhandle of Alaska, the northwest areas there, British Columbia, and curls on back across the Alaska range. This ridge is beginning to break down now, so it will not have quite the influence, but it did bring some very clear skies and very uneventful weather here for a good portion of this week, especially from areas of south central through the Alaska range down into the southeast. Now, Utqiagvik, way in the north, set another record high. Some warmer air has worked its way up along the west coast. 36 the high for today, a new record. Also today is the last sunset of the year at Utqiagvik. The next sunrise will not occur until January 23rd. And another note for you sky watchers, normally the Leonid meteor shower peaks about a day or so ago, but there are some calculations that indicate there could be a little ribbon of material that's caused by the parent comet responsible for this meteor shower could brush eastern North America around 9 p.m. Alaska time. So even though Alaska isn't in a great place to view an enhancement to this meteor shower, there's a slight chance we could see a few more meteors than usual associated with this stream of particles. So keep an eye on the sky between 9 p.m. and midnight Alaska time. Perhaps the calculations are off a little bit, and we might get in on a bit of a late show there with the Leonid meteors. But we're not expecting an incredibly strong shower by any means. And then over the weekend, Gulf Coast is going to see more active weather. We're going to have a couple low pressure systems lifting up into the Gulf, and eventually the lows are going to tend to consolidate and be more active over the North Pacific south of the Alaska Peninsula into the Gulf by early next week. This is going to allow colder air to spill over the northern and central Bering and then push eastward into the west side of the state. So it will be turning colder again along the west coast and western interior, along with some more snow developing as we go into early next week. Now, right now, Utqiagvik and up there at Barrow, we're seeing fog and breezy conditions. Temperature as a mid-afternoon was 33, as I mentioned. A record high of shortly after midnight of 36 degrees up that way. Nome also seeing some fog, but lighter winds. The winds at Utqiagvik were gusting up around and over 30 miles an hour. Lighter winds in Nome this afternoon with a temperature at 34, but with the warmer air, you get fog coming in over the colder water there, so conditions will be slow to improve. Now, beneath the ridge of high pressure, the interior up along the Alaska range, very clear. Summit there, up there just below Windy Pass, 11 degrees this afternoon with brilliant clear skies, and also extending southeastward into the Panhandle. Wrangell enjoying mostly clear skies, a temperature of 30 degrees, but a frontal band will be pushing into the Panhandle here later tonight and on Saturday, and it could initially bring a little bit of a light mix of precipitation and some snow, but the tendency is that as the air warms, it'll be going over to mainly rain during the daytime, especially by Saturday afternoon for areas of the Panhandle, with the exception of further north up Lynn Canal, up toward White Pass will stay mainly snow or a light wintry mix. A heavier band of precipitation will be moving into the Panhandle with another low pressure system and frontal wave that moves into that area early in the week, so be aware that is coming. So we earlier had some winter weather advisories in effect for the west central interior, basically from around Anvik on up toward Galena, Ruby, those areas. That has been allowed to expire at 6 p.m. Earlier, there was some light snow mixed with a little bit of freezing rain. That is in the process of diminishing. Far north, until 9 p.m., there's a high surf advisory for the central Arctic coast around and east of AKwx due to some strong gusty winds, but conditions will be improving there as we go through the overnight and into Saturday. And looking at the satellite imagery, we see the curls in the clouds. There's one area of low pressure out into the Gulf, another secondary low further south toward the bottom central areas of the screen. There's also some other curls in the clouds south of Alaska and then back south of the Aleutian chain. And this is just a number of low pressure disturbances that'll be lifting out of the North Pacific and up into the Gulf, especially the Western Gulf here as we go through the course of the weekend. What this is all going to do is eventually low pressure is going to consolidate more over the North Pacific and the Gulf areas south and east of the Alaska Peninsula, so that it's going to turn the wind field more out of the north and northeast, and this is going to allow colder air to come down in from across eastern Russia into the northern and central Bering. And as Arctic high pressure over eastern Russia builds southeastward, that's going to force that colder air eastward toward the interior. So expect colder temperatures, and so it's going to touch off some snow. We could see areas of lighter accumulating snow develop across the west coast and push inland early next week. So prior to that transition, we still have strong ridge of high pressure, not just at the surface, but aloft. There over western and northwest Canada, with the ridge extending westward along and just north of the Alaska Range, curling back toward the southwest interior. We have the next low lifting out of the North Pacific into the Gulf, and then another low well southwest of the central Aleutians. Later tonight into early Saturday morning, that next low lifts north out of the North Pacific up toward the Gulf, and it's going to have a frontal band that brings some more rain along the immediate coast and snows to the coastal mountains. The interior, the precipitation that was there will just kind of taper off to just become more patchy flurries. I can't rule out a smidgen of a little freezing drizzle, but that would be about it. And then Saturday afternoon, we have the low up over the southwestern Gulf with the frontal band working its way inland there along the Gulf Coast into the Panhandle. And by Sunday, still another low, next impulse going to bring in a round of heavier precipitation, I think, into areas of the northeastern Gulf and into the Panhandle late Sunday night, especially by Monday, as colder air begins to dive south there across the northern into the central Bering. So lows Saturday morning will be below freezing northern Panhandle, but say upper 30s near 40, Craig up towards Sitka, still 41 at Kodiak, but 22 at Anchorage, 2 below at Glen Allen. Saturday afternoon highs will manage to get up into the 40s, the outer western and southern portions of the Panhandle, 46 at Kodiak, but again near freezing in Talkeetna and Anchorage, only 9 above. Copper River Basin there at Glen Allen. And Sunday morning low should generally be above freezing most areas of the Panhandle, with the exception of maybe up to and north of Skagway. And then we're looking for Sunday morning lows again below freezing Anchorage northward, but daytime highs should get back up above freezing most areas, with the exception as you go further up the Susitna Valley or into the Copper River Basin. Colder temperatures below zero, as cold as 23 below there around Northway. So yes, the interior quite chilly. Back toward the west, readings below freezing, but still holding in the mid-20s there, Nome and along the west side of the Seward Peninsula. Saturday afternoon, single digits highs, say at Fort Yukon and Northway, but readings near freezing at Nome, Imanak, and to the north, mid-20s along the Arctic coast. Sunday morning low still a bit below zero in the Yukon Flats and around Northway, normally the cold spots there along the Elkhorn border. And then Sunday afternoon, generally looking at teens and 20s in the interior. And for the southwest interior, Saturday morning lows getting down into the 20s. around or just above 40 along the Aleutian chain. Saturday afternoon, warmest temperatures are riding out along the Alaska Peninsula in the mid-40s. And then for Sunday morning, we could see some single-digit temperatures way up the Kuskokwim and up toward the middle Yukon Valley. Otherwise, again, temperatures just above 40 in Dutch Harbor. And Sunday afternoon, we are anticipating temperatures in the 40s along the Alaska Peninsula, 20s further north as you go up the interior. Colder temperatures will set up November 24th through the 28th along areas of the west and southwest.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Well, it's now time to check out your aviation weather, and if you have a flight planned either Saturday or Sunday, the main weather feature we're going to be watching is an area of low pressure that's lifting out of the North Pacific into the Western Gulf early for the weekend, and then there will be a couple of additional low pressure impulses come out of the North Pacific on the south side of the Alaska Peninsula and then moving back up into the Gulf. Eventually, these systems are going to pull down colder air from eastern Russia across the Bering Sea and eventually into the west coast by early next week. Otherwise, ridge of high pressure remains across areas of south central along the Alaska Range into northwest Canada. This feature has been rather stable but is in the process now of breaking down. We expect IFR conditions over the Gulf as that low approaches from the North Pacific, and then along the west coast a continuation of IFR conditions up through the Yukon Delta, Norton Sound, Seward Peninsula, and even up into the central areas of the North Slope. Saturday afternoon, we will see the IFR areas decrease there along the west and northwest, but increase along the Gulf Coast as there will be some areas of coastal rain and intermountain snows. And for Sunday morning, look for areas of IFR along portions of the North Slope, northwest Arctic coast, down along the northern Seward Peninsula, the lower Yukon Delta, as well as down into the eastern Aleutians and tip of the Alaska Peninsula, and then along the northern Gulf Coast and the outer Panhandle Coast. Sunday afternoon, IFR conditions continue along areas of the northern and northeastern Gulf Coast and the inner channels, inner coastal mountains of the Panhandle with IFR conditions that'll be increasing across the northern and central Bering as that colder air arrives later Sunday and early next week. For Anaktuvuk Pass, we expect MVFR conditions, though IFR conditions will lurk to the north entrance there along the North Slope. Same thing for Adigan Pass, generally MVFR conditions with IFR there along the North Slope. For Lake Clark and Merrill, still under the influence of a weakening mid and upper level high ridge, we expect VFR conditions along the length of the Alaska Range, rainy through windy, as well as Isabel and Mentasta passes. As we drop further southwest, Tanita Pass, VFR, but will start to become MVFR as that moisture lifts northward from out of the Gulf, and we expect Portage Pass to see MVFR conditions along the east entrance, but VFR conditions there for the west entrance. And then finally, the far north end of the Panhandle, Chilkoot and White, we expect IFR conditions during the day on Saturday. Now, freezing levels, the surface freezing line runs along the inner southwest coast through the Kenai Peninsula, along the northern Gulf Coast, in through the inner channels, inner coastal mountains of the Panhandle. Freezing levels aloft are generally around and above 2,000 feet for the southern half of the interior, and they do briefly bump upwards to near and just above 6,000 feet far southern Panhandle, Haida Gwaii, as well as out over the tip of the Alaska Peninsula and toward Dutch Harbor. For icing, the greatest threat of icing will be along the northern Gulf Coast, the outer southwestern areas of the Panhandle, above 4,000 and 6,000 feet. The interior could see some isolated icing along and north of the Yukon River Brooks Range above 3,000 feet, a broader area of above 3,000 foot moderate icing possible there around St. Matthew and in through the central Bering, and then above 8,000 feet there north and in through the eastern Aleutians. Now, the upper level high pressure ridge at 30,000 feet is still evident from southwest mainland back across the Alaska Range in northwest Canada, with a weaker upper level low circulation there over the Gulf. At 9,000 feet, 700 millibars, a more established low pressure circulation there over the southwestern Gulf, with the mid-level high pressure extending from the lower Yukon along and north of the Alaska Range into northwest Canada. But as I mentioned, that feature is breaking breaking down, and at 3,000 feet, we see low pressure circulation there in the southwestern Gulf with some stronger winds, upwards of 40 and 50 knots along the northern and northwestern Gulf Coast. We also have some stronger winds out back toward the western Aleutians, anywhere from 45 upwards to 60 knots from the north-northeast. And this will translate to areas of isolated severe turbulence there south of Cordova on the far northern end of the Gulf, surface to 4,000 feet. We also see some moderate turbulence there and through the Panhandle, outer Panhandle, surface to 6,000 feet, and an area of surface to 3,000 foot turbulence back through the western half of the Aleutians. So have a safe flight if you're able to get out this weekend.
So my heart is definitely racing. I don't know about anyone else's. This is the stuff nerds dream of.
10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, it's gonna 5, 4, 3, 2.
That countdown you just heard? We'll get back to that in a minute. Last episode, we saw the epic launch of ICESat-2, NASA's newest state-of-the-art ice-observing satellite. But now that that's in orbit, the pressure to deliver results is on.
Between launch and, the first ground returns, took 17, 18 days or something like this. It's a time when you're quite nervous.
9 years ago, Dr. Torsten Marcus took over as the lead project scientist for ICESat-2 during a time when the mission needed a champion.
You start fighting for a mission over, 9 years now.
So when ICESat-2 was turned on for the first time 18 days after it was launched, only then would the science team know if the whole thing had worked. And it did. If it sounds like there's a lot of noise in the background, that's because Torsten is being interviewed from a plane 1,500 feet in the air. IceBridge was tasked with the job of bridging the data between the end of ICESat's mission and the beginning of ICESat-2, about a 9-year difference.
The goal is that it would run until ICESat-2 launched and then would have overlap with ICESat-2 as well, so we can get a really long, well-calibrated time series from IceBridge.
As the deputy project scientist for Operation IceBridge, Britt works closely with Torsten to make sure the two missions are syncing up.
The timing was everything during that mission, which was a real challenge because not only do we need to...
Basically what you need to take away is getting an airplane and a satellite in space to fly over the same flight path at the same time and collect matching data is really, really hard. IceBridge was tasked with two objectives. Check the accuracy of ICESat-2's data over land ice and over sea ice. They were able to lock in the land ice data fairly quickly in the mission, but the sea ice data...
It was really tricky. We waited day after day. Do we fly the sea ice? It's still on our list. 7, 6, it's gonna 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Mark on the overpass 0435, 35 Zulu.
Here's what just happened. A plane 1,500 feet up and a satellite 308 miles up measured the same sea ice at the same time. This moment finally linked veteran mission Operation IceBridge's data to that of its new sister mission, ICESat-2. Two projects that, until now, were separate for nearly 10 years.
It's a very satisfying feeling because you do something that is meaningful and in the bigger picture. And it's very satisfying.
Our search for knowledge doesn't end here. Grace Follow-On and ICESat-2, the two satellite missions that launched this year, will continue to bring in incredible data for the foreseeable future. The steady drumbeat of campaigns in the field goes on, but most of all, the people who look for answers will never stop searching. And from our perspective, it's pretty clear why. What is your favorite planet in the solar system?
My favorite planet is the planet Earth.
What? Earth? Really?
The Earth, obviously.
favorite planet in the solar system? Earth, right? We live on it. It's a really important one.
Favorite planet is Earth.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, so
Why?
When you look out at the other planets, they're absolutely fascinating. They've got all sorts of interesting systems going on. They've got dust storms. But then when you're on another planet, looking back at Earth, I mean, it's just incredible.
Whenever you go in different places, it looks so different, so amazing. It's just, I love the planet Earth. It's just a very special planet. This is our home.
We've seen things far beyond the solar system. But even with all that, even the amazing things we've seen, one of the most amazing is the Earth itself.
It's got to be Earth. It's got to be Earth.
It's got to be here. I like the polar regions up here of Earth. Yeah, sorry. It's very boring.
Earth is good.
Earth is good.
We live here, it sustains our life.
I'm not going to turn my back on it.
It's got water, it's got ice, it's got vegetation. I mean, it's rich with life. And so studying Earth is a very, very rewarding career. And I think if we were on any other planet, we would be trying to get to Earth as quickly as we could.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back, and looking at the sea ice edge, we had mild southerly winds along the west coast that eventually turned and curved along the northwest Arctic and central Arctic coast. AKwx has had now at least a couple days of record high temperatures, most recently today 36 degrees. So much of the ice there along the west coast has shifted around, broken up a bit. It's still early season ice, but we are expecting colder air to return across the west side of the state as we go through early next week, thanks to low pressure that will situate itself out over the Gulf and on the North Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula. We can see there is still some shore-fast ice there along the lower Yukon Delta in areas of Norton Sound, but it broke up quite a bit given the mild south-southwest push of air that's been on this side of the state here since mid and late this past week. But as I said, colder air will be returning. In the meantime, winds along the inner channels of the Panhandle, southwest to west, 20-25 knots, gust to 35 knots. Petersburg, waves 4 to as high as 8 feet. Dixon entrance. North winds, 10 knots, 2-foot waves there, Lynn Canal. And then the outer coast, 35 to 40 knot southeasterly gales, kicking up waves 15 to nearly 20 feet as you get from Yakutat westward. And then on Sunday, we expect southeast to south winds in the inner channels, 15 to 20 knots, waves 3 to 6 feet. And outer coast, generally 20 to 25 knots with waves of 8 to 12 feet. And along the northwestern Gulf, winds will be out of the east, northeast at 35 to 40 knot gales with waves of 15, 16 feet. North winds 25 knots, 4-foot waves in Prince William Sound, and northeast winds as high as 30 knots, mid and lower Cook Inlet toward the entrance with waves of 10 to 12 feet. For Sunday, winds will be out of the southeast at 20 to 25 knots off the Kenai with waves of 10 to 12 feet. East winds 25 knots, Prince William Sound, waves 6 feet. And in Cook Inlet, north to northeast winds as much as 20 knots through the lower half of the inlet with 7-foot waves there from off of Homer down to near the mouth. And for Saturday, across the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, winds will be northeast 30 knots there in the vicinity of Kodiak Island, 11-foot waves, Shelikof Strait, 13 feet off Kodiak Island. And as the winds run down the length of the Alaska Peninsula, look for them to turn more easterly, 15 to 20 knots, waves 8 feet south of Sandpoint, 4 feet Bristol Bay down to north of Cold Bay. For Sunday, winds will be variable south and east of Kodiak Island to 10 knots, and northeasterly, Shelikof Strait down through Bristol Bay and the north side there of the Alaska Peninsula at 15 knots with waves of 3 to 4 feet. And out in the Aleutians, generally easterly winds 20-25 knots, waves 11 to 13 feet, North Pacific side 6 to 7 feet on the Bering side, but winds are going to pick up in the far western Aleutians. Going northerly, the cold front will be setting up and pressing south and eastward. We see stronger north flow, western portion of the Aleutians by Sunday, bringing in that colder air. That colder air will really churn up the seas, building waves of 20 to 25 feet in the west, whereas winds will begin to turn out of the north and northwest there through the central and eastern Aleutians and pick up to gale force there north of Atka. For Saturday, across the southwest coast, northeast to east, offshore flow 15 to 20 knots, waves 3 to 5 feet. On Sunday, winds will continue generally out of the northeast, 20 knots out of Norton Sound, 4-foot waves, but as high as 35-knot gales out of the north in the vicinity of St. Matthew with waves of 15 feet. And those stronger winds will be pushing closer toward the western coast as we go into Monday. For Saturday, look for west winds 20 knots along the Arctic coast, generally ice in place. But as you drop through the lower Chukchi Sea, look for waves of 3 feet with winds out of the west and north at 15 knots. And then on Sunday, winds will be out of the northeast to north as we're starting to see that north-northeast flow develop on the west side of the state. 10 to 15 knot winds there along the Arctic coast with ice in place, but going through the Chukchi Sea, waves will build 6 to 10 feet as you pass through the Bering Strait onto the north side of St. Lawrence. And a quick check by Saturday afternoon, we have one low pressure there in the Gulf, frontal band pushing in through the Panhandle. Colder air out over eastern Russia will begin to press southward across the northern into the central Bering and increase the northerly flow there.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.